Sturgill Simpson. You might know him as the snarling Kentucky native who opened the third eye of the country music world with his meta-modern sounds in country music. You might know him as the self-proclaimed King Turd of Shit Mountain who rose to prominence with viral videos playing bluegrass songs in a brewery. You might know him as that dude that won the Grammy Award for Best Country Album and then busked outside the CMA Awards where he was nominated for nothing with his Grammy in his guitar case. Or you might know him as one of a handful of country artists that your hipster friends that usually turn their nose up at country music say is actually good. In any case, there is a lot of hype around Sturgill Simpson, and I think he's deserving of the hype. He's one of the most prolific, unpredictable, and genuinely interesting characters in the independent country music world, and he just released his fifth and possibly his final album of original material, the Ballad of Dude and Juanita. Also, this is Harper. It's my roommate's dog, but she's kind of my daytime companion, and we're going to be talking a lot about a dog in this video, so I figured I would, traumatize Harper right here. Now, wait a second. Is this really going to be the final Sturgill album? And why would people think that? Well, there's a bunch of reasons, namely that Sturgill has said he only wants to make 5 albums a bunch of times throughout his career. In 2014, he said it to Joe Rogan. In 2017, he put up an Instagram post that said, "My entire country music career is a character-based performance art piece in the form of 5 sequential concept albums, all following the traditional Christian narrative of the journey of the human soul." And even though he deleted that post, he's continued to say similar things. At that infamous busking live stream outside the Bridgestone Arena, he said this.
I'm only making 5 albums, and they all do serve a cohesive narrative of the life journey of a human soul from a traditional Western perspective. So High Top Mountain was a seminal album or a past life, like You Can't Go Home. Meta Modern was ethereal, literally like the soul's journey through space. Sailor's Guide represents birth and life lessons learning. The next one going to be about life and sin, and we're literally going to go to hell. And the 5th one will be returning to the light, or absolution.
It's so interesting to think of his career arc as this kind of long-term concept. And so let's just quickly take a little stroll down the long white line of memory lane. Sturgill's first big album was 2013's High Top Mountain, which was one of 3 albums that year that were my top 3 for the year, and all 3 were produced by Dave Cobb. The others were Southeastern by Jason Isbell and Tin Star by Lindy Ortega. But High Top Mountain introduced us to the irascible character of Sturgill Simpson.
Oh, I'm tired of other people trying to take what's mine.
It was super country with a bluegrassy twist. And in that description I just read, it's what Sturgill described as a seminal album of a past life, so maybe that one represents home. He followed that up with meta-modern sounds in country music, and there is a lot of truth in that title because it's kind of an intergalactic spin on country music. It didn't have the kind of down-home, rootsy vibe of High Top Mountain. This one had kind of a psychedelic tinge to it with songs like Turtles All the Way Down. And this is the one that Sturgill said represents the soul's journey through space. A Sailor's Guide to Earth came next. Sturgill says it represents birth, and that's very much the case. This is an album in a lot of ways about becoming a father. You've got songs like Welcome to Earth, Pollywog, and this is the one that Sturgill was up for Album of the Year for at the Grammys, and he won Best Country Album, but I kind of feel like it's the one that I, in the long run, have heard the least about from the hardcore Sturgill fans. The 4th album was a total curveball. It was called Sound and Fury, and it was pretty straightforwardly a rock album. It wasn't trying to posture in any way as being related to country music. This was the album that Sturgill said represented sin, and it definitely has a chip on its shoulder all through it. There's a song in there I love called Make Art, Not Friends, about the kind of two-faced, spineless, fake media critic types. So no one tell Sturgill about this video, please. But the 5-album timeline is kind of obscured by the fact that Sturgill released 2 albums last year, Cuttin' Grass Volume 1 and 2, which were straightforward bluegrass reimaginings of a lot of his music. And I'd say overall, my very favorite Sturgill album is Cuttin' Grass Volume 2. I love Oh Sarah on that album. But a lot of Sturgill fans think that those don't count in the official timeline since they aren't filled with original material. And all that brings us to the Ballad of Dude and Juanita, a very short, very tight 28-minute album that is potentially the last solo Sturgill Simpson album.
First time old dude laid eyes on Juanita.
This album kind of brings the sound of Sturgill Simpson full circle. This is real mountain music that feels bluegrassy in the same way High Top Mountain did. And this one has a kind of cinematic spin on it. You're gonna hear the sound of hammers and jaw harps that make it feel very, I don't know, kind of frontier, and even a little bit humorous at times. There's definitely a whimsy to this album because it's telling one very simple story. If you're intimidated by concept albums, I think this is an awesome concept album to try out because it ain't hard to follow. The story goes like this. Dude and Juanita, they love each other. He's a hardened man and the son of a mountain miner and a Shawnee maiden. She's like this angelic, dark-haired, blue-eyed beauty. She gets kidnapped by a bandit named Seamus and taken away. And so dude sets off on a trail to find her with Sham and Sam, Shamrock, his mule, and Sam, his hound, as well as his tomahawk and his gun and the determination to go find his woman. They ride through the countryside on this rescue mission. Dude takes a bullet to the shoulder at one point, Sam, and trigger warning, and earmuffs Harper. Sam can't handle the journey. He has thorns in his paws, he's played out, and he passes away. Ultimately, Dude finds himself among a Cherokee tribe, and they recognize some of the paraphernalia that he has as Shawnee, and in fact, they have Juanita with them. She was traded to them in exchange for horses. And so he's reunited with his great love and takes her home. And then he goes back out in the epilogue and in the final song of the track, finds Seamus, shoots him, and that's the end of the story.
Son of a mountain miner and a Shawnee maid.
Like I said, this album is super cinematic, and you get so many different shades of the Appalachian country sound on this record. Now you got that creaky fiddle that gives it such a bluegrass edge, but at times here you delve into gospel a little bit, like on Sam with some of those harmonies.
Been many good dog was a friend to a man, but Sam was the greatest one.
Willie Nelson is actually a featured guitar player on Juanita, and you can hear his distinctive guitar sound from his guitar trigger. There's almost a little bit of mariachi in that song. And then vocally, Sturgill's snarl is just so fitting for this dude character. And the characters, by the way, are named after his grandparents. And it just fits like this kind of tough, hardened man. I think my favorite musical section on the whole album is probably the interlude of Shamrock, where it's just meant to evoke the chase and the gallop, and the music's kind of speeding up, and that jaw harp is so bouncy. I'm just almost imagining this kind of like old pitiful mule running across the countryside. And the imagery on the album just transports you to this setting, to a totally other time period. We get mentions of buckskin coats, gun gleams, powdered rifles, flintlock. I mean, some things I didn't even know what they were. I loved when he talked about how Shamrock will kill a snake, where he says he clog dances on a snake. It's just fun words that make the whole story feel alive. And it's interesting to me that this is the album that Sturgill describes as absolution, because I was wondering, how does this represent absolution, if in fact we are to believe what he said at that press conference? Because to be absolved is to be sort of set free. And there's a few ways that I feel like that can apply. The most obvious would be within the story of the album, Juanita is literally set free from the bandit as well as from the Cherokee tribe that was holding on to her. And there's also a theme of reconciliation between the Native Americans and the pioneers here too. In some ways, Dude as a character is also absolved from this kind of hardened self by his love for Juanita. She is kind of this angel that blesses him and kind of gets through the tough exterior. There are these themes of caring about home and caring about family that run through all of his music, and maybe that's what absolves you. But then maybe that idea of absolution applies to Sturgill Simpson as a performer as well, and now that he has completed this arc of the human soul, he feels set free to do whatever else he wants. He has talked in interviews about how he wants to form a band and take some of the pressure off himself as a solo performer and just make music with other people. And so maybe this is the end of solo Sturgill, but the beginning of a new era for him. And now that he has for a decade been sort of the outlaw of the Appalachian scene and woken people up to independent country music, he can kind of move on into other pastures in his life. But I think it's a super cool album overall, and if this is the last solo Sturgill record we get, man, what a career it was, and what a cool way to go out. He is a true outlaw in that he has done what he's wanted through his career for the entire career. And sometimes maybe he's been an asshole, and certainly he has been unpredictable, and every other day it seems like he deletes all of his social media, and I think that's kind of fun. But in this video, I think it's worth mentioning that he's not the only prolific artist to be coming out of the Appalachian region in the last few years. In the country music world, we talk a lot about Texas and Nashville as the two poles of the country music industry. And the general narrative of outlaw country music, which goes back to the aforementioned Willie Nelson, is that the independent-minded outlaw folks are going to base themselves in Texas versus the super corporate established Nashville folks.
I'd rather be an old fence post in Texas than the king of Tennessee.
But I think you could argue that at this moment in country music history, the real outlaw attitude of country music is coming from the hollers of West Virginia and Kentucky, from artists like Sturgill as well as his peer Tyler Childers.
I go running through the thicket.
Now, it's a well-known fact that Tyler Childers recorded Purgatory, the album that put him on the map, with Sturgill Simpson's drummer. And with an acoustic guitar, heartfelt lyrics, and a voice that's sometimes raspy and sometimes yelping, Tyler Childers captured the imagination of a whole generation of country fans with very little fanfare and just great music. Songs like Shake the Frost and Lady May are stark and romantic at the same time.
I'm a stone's throw from the mill, and I'm a good walk to the river.
And you can definitely hear how they influenced up-and-coming artists like Zach Bryan. Meanwhile, there's a straightforward naughtiness on songs like Feathered Indians or certainly Ever Lovin' Hand. And Tyler Childers operates with that same kind of wild card conviction that Sturgill Simpson does, and that was most evident when he won New Artist at the Americana Music Awards.
And the award goes to Tyler Childers.
And then gave a speech that really argued, no, I care about the image of country music, and I think calling myself a country artist matters.
I'm not quite sure how this all came to be. Best I can tell, y'all left your back door open and now there's this stark Raven Hill Jack in your living room. Covered in goat blood. Dying to rant about how Americana hits him in the same place as the words Appalachia and Childers. It crawls up my spine. My name is Tyler Childers. I'm an Appalachian artist from the foothills of East Kentucky, and I play country music. As a man who identifies as a country music singer, I feel Americana ain't no part of nothing, and is a distraction from the issues that we are facing on a bigger level as country music singers. It kind of feels like purgatory. Thank you.
Tyler Childers.
And while Sturgill and Tyler are certainly the two biggest stars in the Appalachian world, and they were going on an arena tour before it got shut down for COVID, they are certainly not the only people that are making great music that is super buzzy and coming out of that region in recent years. Charles Wesley Godwin and his incredible album Seneca, John R. Miller, Kelsey Waldon, Sierra Ferrell, that new album Long Time Coming blew my mind, Cole Chaney and his new album Mercy, Logan Halstead, who I'm wearing on this shirt now. All these artists are some of the buzziest artists in country music, and their sounds are not just straightforward country or bluegrass. You listen to someone like Sierra Ferrell and she's going to have elements of blues and jazz in her music as well. And
so why did you do it? Oh, why did you do it? Why did you fall in love?
there is just this melting pot of musical excellence. And I think when you take all those musical influences and you fuse them with a kind of down-home acoustic vibe and the lyricism of the singer-songwriter world, you get something that is just very straightforward and compelling. I think the place of Appalachia itself provides a lot of fertile ground for songwriting. I mean, first and foremost, a lot of this music is about the mountains, and mountains are evocative. That is why Dolly Parton wrote so much of her catalog about the Smokies. But I think the values of the area matter too. So I live on the western side of Virginia, right by the Shenandoah Valley, kind of on the border of Appalachia. And I think one of the values of this part of the country is a certain skepticism toward corporate greed and corporate culture. And I think having the setting of a lot of this music be coal country, an industry that just raged for about a century and then immediately kind of fell off and left behind broken communities that now have very few prospects for jobs that can make good money, makes for compelling songwriting material.
Well, mining coal ain't a way to make a life.
Especially because there's this tandem value of the admiration of hard work, of relatives that were going down into the coal mines, and of people that know what a hard day of labor is. Take a song like Coal Country by Charles Wesley Godwin that is taking a moment to feel gratitude for the fact that this put a roof over his head and it provides a way of life for people, and yet
now it lies broken, high and cold in its grave of Appalachian stone.
And I think the opioid epidemic is another kind of tragic backdrop for a lot of this music. And yet, so many of the songs are about a sincere love of that place, seeing it for all of its brokenness, and yet loving it and valuing it.
Joy and simple things, staying halfway sane, just another day in the life.
And suddenly, an area of the country that is often dehumanized in media as just like dirty, backward Trumpers that, don't deserve any respect, is a real place. And I think not being in one of these epicenters of industry like Nashville or Austin, the songwriters feel a certain degree of freedom in kind of poking at the rest of culture. And subject matter like church and like sex and like police brutality, if you're Tyler Childers, they're just sung with a certain degree of straightforward, open-handed honesty. In a world where everything feels like a partisan issue, where you're either pro or anti every subject, I think a lot of Appalachian country music holds the line for human complexity and nuance. You can be critical of a place and deeply love a place. And I think people crave that. People crave music that feels real and unjudgmental and nuanced. That's why there's almost a turf war between the Americana scene in Nashville and the red dirt scene in Texas to include these artists as part of their scenes. Because everyone loves this outlaw energy coming out of Appalachia, and it's hard to say if this movement really would have happened without Sturgill Simpson. And so I hope he sticks around for a long time to come. Whether that is as a solo artist, which seems unlikely at this point, or whether that is as some kind of future band that he forms from here on out, Sturgill Simpson's an essential character in the modern country music story, and I didn't have a video about him somehow on this channel, and now I do. So if you liked it, give this video a like, send it to a Sturgill fan in your life, and if it's your first time here, or if you've been lurking for a while, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I talk about country music here, not always the independent world, not always the pop country world. I try to be a little bit of an omnivore. And so let me know your thoughts on the Ballad of Dude and Juanita, on Sturgill in general, and I'll be back with more country stuff very soon. Love y'all. Bye. Here, come here. Okay. Also, this is Harper. Harper, look here. Harper. Okay, she doesn't care.